Ready to go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We're recording, so we're going live to YouTube. We have three members of the committee here. That's Councillor Ewan, the Lord Mayor, myself, and we have two others next in line for to join the committee. Alderman Barakas and Councillor Dutta. Would you two like to join the committee?
Yes, please.
Okay. Would someone move that we co-opt Councillor Dutta and Alderman Barakas, please?
I'll move that, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Ewan. So I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Oh, sorry. Any objections, just raise your hand. No? Okay. Declare that carried unanimously. Okay. Other point I'd like to make, if you wish to be registered as being here, you'll need to turn your camera on. So Councillor Sherlock and Councillor, yeah, you're in there, Councillor Coates. So Councillor Sherlock, you'll need to turn your camera on. Okay, all right. And welcome, Councillor Coates. Okay, we'll move on to item 2, confirmation of the minutes. Would somebody like to raise their hand to move the minutes? No one? Okay, thank you, Councillor Ewan. If there's any objections to the minutes, just raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll declare it carried unanimously. Okay, declare that carried. Item 3, for indication of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Nothing? Okay. So transfer of agenda items. Any requests for transfer? No requests. Item 6, we're on to reports. 6.1 is the network operating plan. This is our briefing. So we have a number of people speaking to us today to give us the briefing. So I might hand it over to Mr. Noy to introduce the participants. Is that okay with you, Mr. Noy?
Yes, sure, Councillor Harvey. And look, Council will recall that we reported on this earlier on in the year. And
sorry, Neil, could you just hold on a second until we open the door for them?
Okay.
You just got to let them in. Okay, everyone here? Okay, all right. Thanks, Neil.
Right, committee and will recall council being advised that we'd teamed up with State Growth to develop a network operation plan for the city and to, I suppose, better manage the movement of people and vehicles through the city and to assist us with the implementation of the Central Hobart Precincts Plan. Council were keen to have a briefing, and so we've got here today to give us that briefing our partner with State Growth, Tim Bickerstaff, with consultants from Jacobs, Catherine Mitchell and Catherine Seal. And I think they are all here. So maybe if we're able to hand over to Tim to commence proceedings.
All right. Welcome, Tim. I'll just run through how we'll do this. So all three of you are welcome to have 7 minutes each to speak. So if you want to speak in sequence, and then we'll have time after all three of you have spoken for some questions. So if you've all got pens and paper with you, just jot down any questions you have for the 3 guest speakers today. So there you go. So over to you, Tim, and welcome.
Sure, thank you. We do have a presentation that was supplied. I'm not sure whether that's
available for people to see.
Craig, could you put that up, please, Craig?
Excellent, thank you. Look, yeah, my name is Tim Bickerstaff. I'm the project manager for this project with the Department of State Growth in our network performance area. The network operations plan is a project that we're working with council, and we've engaged Jacobs as a consultant to assist us with that. If we can move to the next slide, please. You'll be aware that there's only a limited amount of space available on the transport network and multiple demands for use of that space, be it for traffic movement, parking, footpath dining, and many other uses. And any decision to preference one use will generally be at the expense of another. Currently, operational decisions to preference one group over another are made on an ad hoc basis and without any strategic guidance. Furthermore, decisions relating to projects that might impact the road network are made without necessarily considering the opportunity for trade-offs. For example, adverse impacts to general traffic are often weighted more heavily than benefits to other user groups, such as pedestrians, cyclists, or public transport. The Hobart Network Operations Plan will guide the development and operation of the Inner Hobart Transport Network and provide a basis for decision-making that reflects the competing priorities between transport modes and surrounding land uses. Can we move to the next slide, please? The study area for the Network Operations Plan is focused on Inner Hobart and the CBD, although it also considers interactions with other areas. This encompasses the study area for the Central Hobart Precinct Plan, which Council is currently running in parallel with the Network Operations Plan. And it's also important to note that the study area includes both the state and local road networks and seeks to focus on how the user experiences the network rather than looking at being impacted by jurisdictional boundaries. I'll hand over to Katie for the next slide.
So my name's Katie Mitchell. I work for Jacobs. I'm the project manager for this study. We could just move on to the next slide if that's okay. Thank you. So the basis of the network operating plan is really based on the concept of movement in place. This is something that's been developed around Australia and overseas to really help guide the development and implementation of an integrated transport planning system. What a movement in place process does, it seeks to align the movement of people and goods with the amenity and quality of a place, such as Inner Hobart. It's very much focused on an outcome, what stakeholders and locals within Hobart seek to want for the future, and it's very people focused, so very much focused on the users of the network. It recognises that we can't identify and prioritise every single street for every single mode, and it also recognises that not every single street has a popular destination on it. It also notes that streets can change along their length, so part of a street may be a particularly active corridor, and there may be a lot of retail shops, but the other end of the street may not be a particularly active space. So the concept of movement in place is very much an aspirational, what do we want Hobart to look like in the future? And as I said, it's very much trying to map movement corridors along with places and see where there are potential conflicts and what the opportunities are in different parts of Hobart. I hand over to Stuart Baird to discuss the next slide.
Are you there, Stuart?
Yes, so we have the next slide on, which just brings us back to the Central Hobart Precinct Plan. And elected members will be aware of this. This project is running hand in hand with the Network Operating Plan. And the Central Hobart Precinct Plan really starts to help us define the place side of the previous slide. It helps us really guide that future development of public infrastructure provision, articulate the role. I don't need to read out all the dot points on here, but the precinct plan work, which is currently being led by James McElhenney, will give us the framework to suggest how our transport network in the city is going to need to service the changing land uses of the city into the future. And so these two projects are very much being run hand in hand and talking to each other about how we are going to help plan the city of the future here in Hobart. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Stuart. We wanted to emphasise that as part of this, we have undertaken a significant amount of stakeholder engagement. So we've done this in a number of different ways. We've sent out a series of questions and actually contacted all the stakeholders you can see listed on this slide. The range of stakeholders is quite significant. So we've looked at state and local government, of course. We've looked at transport groups such as RACT and Taxi Association. We've also approached different operators of the network, as well as industry groups, community groups, and planning organisations. In the past 2 weeks, we've also run 3 separate workshops with a host of these stakeholders to really delve into some of the detail of what the aspiration is for Hobart in more detail. If we're able to move on to the next slide. Thank you. So as part of the workshopping process and the engagement that we've done over the past month, we've really sought to understand from each of the different stakeholders, what do they see as the different street, road and place user groups. I'll just quickly explain what we mean by these. So we recognise there's a raft of different uses of the network, from commuters to residents to tourists to shoppers, emergency workers, the freight industry, for example. There's also a lot of different modes that operate on the network, from general traffic to transit, power to wheelers, active transport and freight again. What we're seeking to do is try and understand who wants to use the network at what time of the day, in what location and what the priority is. And from this, help define what different corridors within Hobart and what different places look like. So the aim is to really identify what are the strategic corridors for the different mode and user groups, what are seen as more activity centres and local areas. And from a place perspective, start to identify what we see as significant state, regional, city and local destinations that will attract users in, and then understand where those competing demands and uses are, and help develop a movement in place framework and a network operating plan to manage and guide the development of Hobart into the future. Tim, I'll just hand back to you to wrap up.
Thanks, Katie. So we're doing this project in 2 phases. Phase 1 is nearing completion, and that is about identifying the framework within which using these users and modes and movement in place. And the second phase, which will be commencing soon, will look at identifying options for treatments and operational strategies to take forward and to see the framework introduced onto the network. That's the end of our presentation for the moment. Unfortunately, with the workshops only having been completed yesterday, we were not able to provide much more in terms of the outcomes at this stage, but that will be provided in due course.
Okay, Tim, thanks for the presentation, and Katie and Catherine there, and thanks Stuart as well. We'll open it up to questions now. If anyone's got a question, could they raise their hand, and then we'll go to you. No questions? Councillor Ewan.
Thanks. Just a little question. When would we expect that feedback to make it back through to us?
Well, Jacobs is aiming to deliver our phase 1 report by the end of July, and after that.
Thanks, Councillor Ewan. Any Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions. I suppose first one, you did, I think it was Tim mentioned the ad hoc nature that this is, that the transport solutions have been sort of done with in the past. And I suppose just going off that, this report is going, this plan, sorry, what sort of, what's the word? What aspects of that is that going to cover? I imagine it's going to cover like the intersection systems. I imagine it's going to cover timings of traffic lights and stuff like that. What exactly are we boiling it down to as far as the specifics of it? Oh, it's disappeared. Oh.
You there, Tim?
Yeah, sorry, that all froze up, so I missed that. If was that a question? Sorry, I missed it all. Sorry.
Oh, okay, I'll try again. Just starting off I think one of the things you said at the beginning, it was about the ad hoc nature that some of these things have been decided in the past as far as transport in the city. And just going off that, this network operating plan, as far as the specifics of what this is going to include, what will that boil down to? I imagine things like traffic lights and traffic intersections and traffic light timings and things like that would be a part of it, and also crossings and stuff like that. But what specifics are we actually going to be getting into when this does come back?
Look, the operation of the traffic lights is certainly one of the key things, and how they are timed and sequenced. And we'll also look at whether there's other changes that need to be made to various parts of the network to achieve operational performance, and that's something that we've been working through in this phase, is to identify what some of those performance targets might be, and it provides an opportunity. It provides a framework to then say to justify potential changes to the network that might be needed to achieve those performance measures. So whether it's a physical changes to an intersection or the road layout, or implementation of footpath widening or a bike lane or whatever it might be, or a bus transit priority measures, those are the sort of treatments that are likely to come out of this.
So these are all things that, like, just going off what you said at the beginning, it'd be better if we were all doing in sort of collaboration and with some sort of plan rather than just doing on an ad hoc basis. I suppose going off the, like you said, the width of footpaths, the number of lanes, the type of intersections, and if we talk about timings of things like traffic lights and stuff like that, I imagine we'd all very much prefer not to be doing things on an ad hoc basis as well when it comes to things such as speed limits.
Look, that's something that's one of the measures being involved, but it's, yeah, I don't have anything to comment on the speed limits per se at this stage.
Right.
Next, we've got Councillor Sherlock, followed by Councillor Dutta, who have questions. So, Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much. I suppose that my question kind of just goes off what Alderman Barakis was just saying. I was just wondering, with regards to the second phase, when you mentioned that the framework would be introduced into the network, I didn't really understand what that meant. And so what does it mean at a practical level? And then going off probably what Alderman Barakis was saying, just to not have things at an ad hoc level. I suppose you did mention that it's not really ad hoc in the sense that the Central Hobart Precinct Plan, as well as this, are working in collaboration. But I did want to know what, at a practical level, that phrase when you said framework introduced into the network, what does that mean?
So yes, the framework being So yeah, so in terms of introducing ideas for further consideration, so the framework is not going to say, well, let's go and build this now. This will be a way of identifying options for consideration, and then we'll go through due consideration as any other project might.
Okay, thank you. So we can't really identify at the moment what at a practical level will be included within that network until the framework is actually set up and introduced, which is what you're actually doing right now at phase 1.
That's right.
I better summarize it. Yeah, okay, fabulous. Thank you.
Councillor Dutta, and also Councillor, oh no, you've lowered your hand. Okay, yep, thanks Councillor Dutta.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. My question is, it may not be appropriate, but I thought I'd ask anyway. Will this plan in any way help in solving the traffic congestion?
Yes, well, what it does is identify locations where there might be spare capacity in the network and how the road space can be best allocated to achieve a broader objectives. It's not necessarily it's not that silver bullet treatment. It's a way of managing the network and trying to better manage the network.
Just a follow-up question through you, Chair.
Yep, go ahead.
So are you suggesting that there could be some help, as it were, with regards to this problem you're facing with traffic jam, etc.?
Potentially, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dutta. If Alderman Barakis could lower his hand, as well as Councillor Dutta, and we've got a question from Councillor Coates.
Thank you. And look, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your presentation. I guess I just wanted to get my head around, I think most of us would agree that Hobart's a slightly unique city in so much as it's a, not only is it in a CBD area, but it's a nexus point. If you want to go from the south of the state to the airport, you've got to go through the CBD, which doesn't happen in a lot of other cities. Look, I note that part of this report is, I mean, obviously it says there will be consultation with groups like the RACT, but also the retail precinct holders. I'm curious, I know, I mean, two organisations, one being the hospital and one being the working port. Are they going to be, I mean, what sort of consultation has taken place with them, and or what would you sort of propose to do with them? Because I guess they're in a weird scenario where, whether they like it or not, when you've got ambulances need to get in as quickly as they can to get to a hospital, or where you've got essentially a working port where you've got freight going to and from, but it's actually not destined for Hobart CBD at all, but it's destined for other parts of the state, but it comes via the Port of Hobart. I was just curious as to what consultation, if any, sort of has taken place or is proposed to take place.
I might just defer to someone from Jacobs to just confirm about the consultation.
Okay. So with regard to TasPorts, yes, they have been involved in the consultation process to date. So as I identified earlier, we went out to all the different stakeholders listed with a series of questions to understand what they thought about the network, where they felt the users were, what they thought the challenges were in relation to themselves, and in terms of a broader perspective. TasPorts have also recently participated in the workshops we've just held. We've also gone to the major employers such as the hospital and the university. And again, they've both responded to the stakeholder engagement process we've had. One thing we are now doing is collating all the data and inputs we've received from the past 3 workshops. And we will be going out to all stakeholders just to check to see whether there's any further inputs they would like to provide and any further information they would like to contribute during this process.
Okay, I'm just conscious of the time. So Alderman Barakis, your hand is still up. Did you have another question?
I did have another question. Just quickly, it was mentioned.
And also, Councillor Coates, could you lower your hand, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. There was a mention in the report. There was the graph about the balance between competing sort of forms of transport and competing interests. I don't want to use the word competing interest, so to speak, but the competing sort of forms of transport, how one thing can sort of sometimes necessarily come at the expense of another. How do you decide or formulate what the appropriate balance is there? Like what are the what do you call it? The sort of the factors and the variables that you're considering when we're talking about what's the appropriate mix of, we have this much priority for road traffic, this much priority for pedestrian or active transport, and this much priority for public transport. Like, how is that all sort of set?
Well, look, the framework is a guide and gives us will hopefully give us an indication of the relative priorities of different uses. In terms of resolving specific situations, that will come down to a case-by-case consideration.
So we haven't sort of formulated that quite as yet. Then.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Unless there's someone who hasn't asked a question, we might end it there, I think. But I thank the speakers for coming along today to give us their presentation. And if we have any further questions, I'm sure we'll be able to put them through the offices at this point in time. But very exciting project, and I'm looking forward to the final outcome here, because I think it will have huge implications for how the city functions from a mobility perspective. So thanks very much for coming along this afternoon, and see you later. You
Thank
can
you very
tune
much.
out now if you want, unless you want to hang around for the rest of the meeting. Yep. Thank you. Bye-bye. So I forgot to mention that the Deputy Lord Mayor was an apology. So that's, already been noted. So item 6.2. Sorry. Yeah, we need to, we moved this for receiving and noting. Yep. Okay, hang on.
I'm happy to move that, Chair. No,
okay. All right. Thanks, Alderman Barakis. So moved. If there's any objections to that, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll declare it by consensus. Okay. Thank you all. That's passed unanimously. Item 6.2 is a request for speed limit reductions in Hobart Central Business District and retail precincts. We have two deputations. Okay, so we'll hear from Gary Bailey first, who's the chair of the Road Safety Advisory Council. Are you there, Gary? Yes, you are. So you've got 5 minutes, Gary, to speak to us, and then we'll ask you questions after you speak. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay, Bill? Now, a lot of, so I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
In the preparation of the paper you had before you from your council officers, we supplied a deal of information to assist them, some of the evidence, and there's voluminous amounts of evidence about lower speed limits in urban areas, globally, in fact. So what you have before you is really a brief snapshot of the evidence. The important thing, I think, is that this is the first step, that you intend to go and consult with stakeholders. Now, the important thing for us is that those stakeholders also get the evidence that underpins these proposed lower speed limits. So I think there'll be some more work that will need to be done between the Road Safety Branch and the Department of State Growth, which basically does the administration for the Road Safety Advisory Council, and yourselves, and indeed any other councils. We have a speed management project in train at the moment where we want to supply this evidence to all councils in Tasmania, because overwhelmingly they are the road managers. Something like 14,000 kilometres of roads controlled by councils and about 3,000 kilometres controlled by the state government. So obviously local government has an important role to play. This is an important initiative, we think, not just for Hobart, for potentially other councils, and obviously for those councils bordering on Hobart, the Greater Hobart area. What the evidence does, that really underpins all the advice that the Road Safety Advisory Council gives to the state governments, based on what's called the Safe System Approach to road safety. And essentially what that means is we're human, we make mistakes, and we need to do everything we can when someone makes a mistake to mitigate the results of that. Again, there's considerable evidence, and you have some of it briefly before you on the effect of impacts at various speeds. You'll see that, but it's worth reiterating because the RACT, which I gather does in principle support this initiative so far, that outlines it in their policy. And I've got it in front of me. If a pedestrian is hit by a car, they're more likely to survive if the car is going about 30 kilometres an hour. Once the speed increases, the prospect of greater injury is greater. Now, this is not new science. This is Newtonian physics. In other words, the faster you go, the harder you're going to hit an object, and the more damage there'll be. And of course, if you're going more slowly in the car, greater opportunity to stop in time. So that's pretty much the theory behind it. There have been some initiatives already in Hobart, as you know, to lower speed limits to 30, and that was by Tasports on the waterfront some years ago. And of course, there've been some speed zones lowered to 40 already. There's been a lot of research recently in New South Wales on what's called high pedestrian activity areas, where there's a lot of interaction between vehicles and pedestrians. And there's nationwide examination of the proposal to go to 40 or to 30. It is ad hoc, because I heard Simon Baracus mention that earlier. It is ad hoc, and the reasons are that we have so many different road managers. If the state alone controlled all the roads and all the speed limits, then clearly all decisions about this wouldn't be ad hoc. They'd be done on a purely an evidence basis, and perhaps with the ultimate decision by the Transport Commissioner. And of course, again, in this case, he is the ultimate authority on this. That's why it'll be good to see stakeholders, and there's already a great range of views about speed limits in Hobart, that at least
Gary,
make their minds up on the evidence.
All right, Gary, thank you. That's good timing. So I'll open it to questions now. Does anybody have a question? We have one from the Lord Mayor, followed by Alderman Baracus, followed by Councillor Dutta.
Thanks, Gary. So can I just confirm that, so the Road Safety Advisory Council is supportive of lowering speed limits to in high pedestrian areas or people activity areas to 40 or to 30? What would you prefer the most in
the increasing evidence is should be 30, but there's reasons for incremental change, and this is because there has always been public and political resistance to lowering speed limits, and it behoves local government to get out there and negotiate with the community and talk to them, and as I've said, most importantly, provide the evidence so you can make rational decisions based on the evidence. We support those lower speed limits because, as I said, what underpins them is the safe distance approach, which has been adopted by every Australian state and the federal government.
Can you just clarify that again for me? The how this fits in with a national road safety strategy. Like what we're doing here is something that's part of a trend happening nationally, or as part of this national road safety strategy. Can you just quickly?
It is one of the priorities. It is one of the priorities in the redrafting of the National Road Safety Strategy, and only recently all transport ministers, federal and state, ticked off on those priorities. There's still a lot of work to do. That's not a decision that this will happen, but lower speed limits, particularly where there's high pedestrian activity, is up there for consideration. That doesn't mean states won't act unilaterally, and they have in some cases. A good example is South Australia, where they've lowered their speed limits in school zones to 25k.
Okay. So, Gary, what do you say to people who think this kind of policy is anti-car?
Well, it's absolutely not. It is actually pro-car. because it makes every road user safer. Every car driver is also a pedestrian, as it happens. We get out of our car and suddenly the environment changes from being inside that steel shell to being out on the road and more vulnerable. The car has given us the greatest mobility and freedom we've ever had. Anyone who's being lifted out of poverty in the third world wants a mobile phone, a refrigerator, good power and a car. So it's absolutely not anti-car. But it is there, these low oil limits are there to protect road users, protect
the right places. Yeah.
The key question everyone needs to ask if they have to make a decision about this is, do we accept that serious and fatal injuries are an acceptable cost in any transport system? And in short, is it okay for a few Tasmanians to die so people can get from A to B? Who would like to answer that question? 17 deaths so far this year, a considerable number of serious injuries. We're heading for a higher overall toll than last year. We had a terrible start to the year. One death is one death too many. And already there's evidence in Hobart when we dropped the speed limit to 50 some years ago from 60, 17% decline in fatals and serious injuries in that time over the next 3 years.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. And just very quickly, the 30 kilometres an hour impact on pedestrians and cyclists versus the 50 kilometres an hour impact on cyclists and pedestrians, and that curve. There's graphs all over the internet about that. I mean, are you able to provide us with the sort of official Tasmanian version of that curve, and whether it's sort of it has been updated on Australian research? Or
no, that curve is globally accepted. That's simply the science. That's what happens.
Do you want to just repeat again? So it's at 30 kilometres an hour, the risk of death if you're a pedestrian or cyclist
is
reduced. 10%?
If it was 40, yeah. If it was, and you want the percentage terms, look, I haven't got those in front of me.
Okay.
We supplied some material to you at reasonably short notice. And obviously we can do more now. This will be going out for a stakeholder consultation.
That would be great if you could provide that. Thank you.
We can give you, I think if any alderman who's listening, if they want that information, obviously we're very happy to provide it perhaps via the council officers and then for distribution.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lord Mayor. Next is Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Bailey. Just a couple of quick questions, I suppose, just to start and to make sure we're all on the same page. It seems clear that you're endorsing the recommendations that are put forward to the committee.
Yeah, we endorse anything that fits under the Safe Systems approach to road safety, and
yep.
these do.
Yep, thank you. So I suppose it's recommending 30 kilometre an hour speed limits in some places and 40 kilometre an hour speed limits in other places, and then some to stay at 50. So you think that's just once again you agree with that approach? I'm assuming.
Well, it depends. You have to make a judgment according to the road infrastructure. There are some streets in Hobart, as you know, that the best you can do would be 30 kilometres an hour, according to how they're built, and some are very old streets, of course. There are some areas, particularly one ways with 3 lanes and with the right signal sequencing, where 50 is might be perfectly reasonable. Speed limits are set according to the quality of the infrastructure. Germany is always the best example. They build great autobahns, and these are often used as the argument by people who don't want speed limits lowered, saying, oh, it's freewheeling in Germany. That's because they build their highways to cater for high speed. Interestingly, in Germany, they were the first. In 1971, they lowered many urban speed limits to 30 kilometres an hour.
So thank you for that. And so obviously notwithstanding massive investment in bringing our infrastructure up to that kind of standard, 30 kilometres an hour would be safer than 40 kilometres an hour or 50 kilometres an hour, I assume is the implication there.
Certainly is. When you've got a high mix of pedestrians and vehicles and the likelihood of collisions.
Right. So I suppose the other question would be why not 30 kilometres an hour across the board if that was the case. But then secondly, I suppose if 30 kilometres an hour is safer than 40 kilometres an hour, wouldn't 20 kilometres an hour be safer than that, and then 10 kilometres safer again? My question is, I suppose, is where do you draw the line, and what are the competing interests that we have to balance when we're figuring out what the appropriate speed limit is?
Well, yeah, there are competing interests, and 30 kilometres in a high pedestrian activity area sees not just the speed upon impact, but the capacity of a vehicle to slow more quickly in a busy area. Look, I'm not the road engineer who has to judge whether what streets should be under new speed regimes. That's not my role. However, I'm sure the council officers can, if they're subscribers to the Austroads material, and that's basically the peak body supported by all states that look at all this sort of infrastructure standard. There's a recent document out about how local government can manage its roads, because they do vary greatly, and you have to make a judgment on the risk on each road. It's called an infrastructure risk rating tool, and it's being used increasingly around Australia as a way of setting these speed limits, not just in urban areas, but in particularly rural areas, because the number of fatals and serious injuries on rural roads with a 100-kilometre speed limit is way above what it should be.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Councillor Dutta, for your question.
Thank you through you. Thank you for your presentation. A number of questions that I had have already been asked. So let me just focus on one or two questions. One is that if we slow the traffic down, will that in turn, as a ramification, impact on jamming the traffic and creating more congestion? Just question one.
I'm not a traffic engineer, and so I can't answer that question. Obviously, it depends on the volumes, the sort of road it is. But there are people within the Roads Department of the Department of State Growth who could answer that question.
Thank you so much. And the second question is, I understand that in a dense urban areas, this works better if you reduce the kilometers from 50 to 30, etc. Will you consider Hobart to be a dense urban area?
Again, I'm not a city planner. I've lived here all but 2 years of my life, so I don't think it's particular. I can only give you a layman's opinion. I don't think Hobart's particularly dense. And the interesting thing about our traffic, and again, it's only a personal view, is that as we all know, on school holidays, things are a little better off. Perhaps the bigger question is, how do we plan urban areas so school traffic doesn't interfere with commuter traffic?
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I've got a question for Gary. Evidence that I've seen across time and a number of conferences and things have argued that slower speeds have a beneficial impact on shopping strips, that allow people moving through areas at a slower speed helps the business community along shopping strips. Could you confirm or otherwise that information?
That's beyond the scope of the Road Safety Advisory Council. We only advise the Minister on matters of road safety, and what the consequences are. We leave that to others, and obviously a minister, when making a final decision about perhaps speed limits on a state basis, may well get evidence about that. I don't know, but it is beyond our scope.
Okay, thanks, Gary. All right. So we've still got hands up from Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Reynolds and Councillor Ewan. I'm not sure what order they came up in, but we might start actually with Councillor Ewan and Councillor Sherlock, since the Lord Mayor's already asked some questions. So Councillor Ewan.
Thanks. Yes, I guess this isn't really directed to Gary, but thank you very much for your presentation. It's really hard to argue with that information and data. Proof's in the pudding. I guess my question is more like we've seen. I know I've seen articles about you know, and especially during and post COVID recovery, revitalizing urban centres and using the space more wisely for, you know, cafes and stuff. So I have no doubt that there is an economic argument to be made. So I guess how do we go about gathering that sort of data to back this process up?
Well, that won't be our role. So
yeah, no, sorry. I guess that wasn't really for you. It was more just a comment generally to the committee. But thank you.
If I could help, I think Graham Lynch might touch on that, given some of the work that the Hart Foundation has done in previous years.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So maybe Councillor Ewan, you can ask it again with Graham. So we'll go on to Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. So through you, maybe this is, I'm not really sure if this is something you can answer, Gary, or not, but I suppose from your lay opinion, I'd just like to know if speed limits are reduced, do you think that impacts at all on businesses or customers coming into the city?
again, that is out of scope for the Road Safety Advisory Council.
Yeah.
That's evidence would have to be gathered from elsewhere. Obviously, asking the retail sector what they think and looking at the experience in other states.
Yeah, okay, great. And I suppose it does open up different options as well when you do reduce limits. Would that be correct in terms of, or opens up different forms or modes of transport? Or if
I'll just jump in here. I think we are heading into territory that Gary's not across. So he's with the road safety stuff rather than the economic stuff. So we might just cut the questioning line off there. Otherwise, we'll just get the same answer from Gary, that it's someone else's responsibility to do that analysis. So,
thank you, Chair. Thanks, Gary.
And look, we'll come back to the Lord Mayor. But we do
very
need
quickly. Yeah, very quickly. Sorry. Look, I just did want to clarify with Gary just about your aspiration for these lower speed limits in the high activity areas. I mean, is it your aspiration to see these kind of 30 kilometres or 40 kilometres an hour in even quite like right across Tasmania in most of our towns, high pedestrian areas, and high pedestrian is high pedestrian for that town? Or is it really this kind of policy you're thinking is more just you're only expecting to see it in a Hobart and maybe Launceston? I mean, do you hope to see other local governments doing these sort of investigations?
Well, as I've said at the outset, if this is a foundation of the safe systems principles, which we abide by, which we endorse, then we're highly supportive. But it must come down to the judgment of each council about what's best for their area. There may be some country towns that might consider it. They might, Ross, for example, would it matter if it lower the speed limit there, because everyone just cruises along at about 20 anyway. It's also interesting that some areas you have to post a speed limit, but effectively the speed limit most people go by is well below what is posted for various reasons. You've got to look at what infrastructure you've already got, what the cost is. Incremental change, we believe, is best. Trials have proved successful in other states where a few witches' hats, some changes in the line marking to test things out to see how they go. As I said, there's no appetite in the state for blanket change to speed limits from on high by the state government. They went there some years ago on advice from the Road Safety Advisory Council to reduce some speed limits on rural roads. 80 kilometres an hour on gravel roads got through, but reducing some speeds from 100 to 90 or 80 on other roads was a step too far. And we have to be pragmatic, and that's why now this infrastructure risk rating tool is so valuable, because you can judge each road on its merits and what the speed limit should be, and then you've got the evidence to show the local community why a speed limit should be lowered or stayed the same, or indeed, if roads improve, raised.
Look, okay, Gary, look, we've got to move on, but I appreciate your deputation. So you're welcome to stay and listen to Graham's deputation and also listen to the debate, but I'll throw it over to Graham now. Welcome, Graham. So if you've got 5 minutes to give us your deputation, then we'll have questions afterwards as well. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Chair, and it's a great pleasure to be able to come and talk to this committee on what for the Heart Foundation is a very important issue that faces us here in Tasmania. The Heart Foundation is a health promotion charity. We've been in existence for over 60 years, and this particular issue that the committee is considering, from the Heart Foundation's perspective, we have a real investment in physical inactivity and the burden that physical inactivity, that is in Tasmania, is not being physically active, is a major cause of death in Australia. There are about 42,000 deaths attributed to cardiovascular disease in Australia each year. And if we can reduce heart disease by up to 35% by just being more physically active, and it's not only heart disease, it's also diabetes, cancers and other chronic conditions. So physical activity is a very important contributor to reducing the burden of death and suffering and improving health and wellbeing in Australia and in Tasmania. In fact, if physical activity was a pill, we often talk about everybody in Australia would take it if it could be prescribed for the health benefits that it delivers. The basis of this deposition, though, has come about really through the COVID circumstances, where there's been a real elevation of the importance of health and wellbeing in the public debate over the last 3 or 4 months. A lot of other things have fallen by the wayside as we've looked to preserve and protect our population. And the Heart Foundation has actually been proposing 3 activities through a snapshot position statement that's been circulated to some members of council, but also to the Hobart City Council Active Travel Committee, and that committee is familiar with that piece of work. And it talks about reallocation of street spaces to encourage more pedestrian and cycling and active travel, something around signalised crossings for pedestrians, but most important to the subject matter of this discussion today, about lowering speeds in neighbourhood streets. So the Heart Foundation supports the principles underpinning the recommendations in this report before the committee. We're not experts in road engineering and so on, but we are about the principles that can encourage people to be more physically active and therefore reduce the burden of disease. One thing I would like to draw to the committee's attention, I spoke about the importance of health and wellbeing in Tasmania, and last year the Premier, the Deputy Premier and the Premier's Health and Wellbeing Advisory Council signed off on a Tasmanian statement about working together for the health and wellbeing of all Tasmanians. And it really sets the principles, I think, that should cast this debate. Gary's talked about road safety and accidents, but health and wellbeing of all Tasmanians, so the statement declares, is enhanced by our natural open spaces, by our fresh food and clean air and water. And health and wellbeing is the foundation of a successful and bright future for all Tasmanians. So in these considerations, I think that the City of Hobart should be congratulated for the way that it approaches the health and wellbeing of the community. There are co-benefits, of course, that come from action on increasing pedestrian and active travel and cycling in the City of Hobart. And those co-benefits are anticipated in the Tasmanian Statement. And that they are things like it contributes to reducing the impact of climate change, reducing congestion, pollution, including noise pollution. I think it's also just in the framework, it's interesting that under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act, there's an objective to promote the health and wellbeing of all Tasmanians and visitors to Tasmania, ensuring a pleasant and efficient and safe working environment for working, living and recreation. And I think that's something that the City of Hobart takes quite seriously when it's looking at the health and wellbeing of the community. Further, of course, under the general function of councils, their councils must develop and implement strategies to promote and improve public health. And under the Local Government Act, councils should provide for the health, safety and welfare of the community. So from the Heart Foundation's perspective, we've been advocating for reduced speed limits in urban areas and in neighbourhoods now for over 10 years in Tasmania. And Tasmania is ideally suited for retrofitting, and reducing speed limits has no infrastructure cost. Effectively, it's just a matter of changing legislation and slowing traffic down so that cyclists, walkers, people who are relying on public transport can move about higher density areas safely. So we advocate for 30 kilometre/hour speed limit for residential streets and in peak pedestrian areas.
That's time, Graham. You'll need to wrap up in a few minutes, in a few seconds, really. Yep.
Yep. So just in closing, what I would say that the Heart Foundation does support the principles behind the recommendations before the committee to continue to make Hobart a vibrant and active and living city, to promote the health and wellbeing of all Tasmanians and visitors to Tasmania, and recognises that heart health and wellbeing is the foundation of a successful and bright future for all Tasmanians.
Thank you, Graham. We'll open to questions. We won't go as long, I don't think, as we did with Gary, but if anyone would like to ask Graham a question, feel free, put your hand up. Okay, we have questions from the Lord Mayor and Councillor Dutta, in that order.
Thanks, Graham. I'm just wondering, can you just spell out a little bit more clearly again the link that you see between reduced speed limits and reducing congestion?
Yes, Lord Mayor. So in the ideal situation, we would separate pedestrians and cyclists from vehicular traffic, but that's not possible in many situations, particularly in the City of Hobart. So we know that by slowing traffic down, there's evidence from all over the world that one of the major barriers to people walking and cycling is the perception of safety. Once you slow traffic to 30 km/h, the evidence shows that pedestrians and cyclists and traffic can coexist in our streets safely, and it removes one of the major barriers to people walking more, using public transport that may require walking at the end of a journey, and also cycling.
And has there been any surveys through the Heart Foundation about how much of a barrier it is for people to be walking or cycling or active transport, that fear factor?
Yeah, as I said, it's a significant factor. And there is evidence all around. One has to look no further than places like Melbourne, and not just in the city of Melbourne, but in the city of Yarra and other parts of Victoria, where speed limits have been reduced, and the uptake of cycling and walking and the use of public transport has increased significantly. And there's plenty of evidence and data that demonstrates that.
It would be great if you could provide us some of those examples.
We certainly can provide that to the committee.
And just very quickly, my understanding is that this 40 km/h at least in the CBD is quite common now in most of the capital cities. Do you have a sense about that, and about whether Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, some of those, how we sit compared to them in terms of the CBDs?
Yeah, look, it's quite common. 30 kilometres an hour is quite common in Melbourne and other capital cities in Australia. So 30 kilometres, as the Heart Foundation advocates, is the sort of speed that you can share streets and neighbourhoods and the city area comfortably with pedestrians and cyclists. And in fact, there are we have situations here in the city of Hobart where we have 30 kilometre speed limits, and the anecdotal evidence is that you can see that people walk and cycle in those areas and share those spaces quite comfortably with motor vehicles.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Councillor Dutta, followed by Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Graham, for your presentation. Just two questions. With regards to the walking, so that there would be improvement in the well-being of Tasmanians, would you consider recommending or suggesting that we take away car park area and meters so that people walk at a greater distance to get to shopping centres? Question one.
Yes, certainly. There are lots of things that can be done in the built environment that that remove barriers and make it part of normal day life to walk further. And it's an opportunity to get 30 minutes of physical activity a day, which is what the Heart Foundation would recommend to get those health benefits. So that's certainly part of what a public policy approach could be to encourage the uptake of walking and cycling.
Yes. So my follow-up question to that is that because we are simply suggesting or recommending a reduction to 30, for example, that will not necessarily mean that people will walk more just because you're reducing speed.
Well, the evidence is that where speed limits are reduced to 30, where there is a high volume of pedestrian traffic, then people feel safer to walk in those situations. So, for example, in Liverpool Street in the city of Hobart, the foot traffic there is quite significant, and people feel safe to be able to cross the road. It's more convenient, and it's good for business. The evidence again around Australia is that where pedestrian traffic increases, where speed limits are lowered and you have more pedestrians and cyclists, then businesses tend to thrive as well. Property values increase, and there's a good economic case for more walking and cycling.
Thank you. Would you be able to provide that information to the committee as well?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Or if you could provide that to all of the councillors and aldermen, Graham, that'd be great too. Next is
I think you called me, but I just lost your audio for a second there, Bill. So
right.
Confirm that? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Might be a connection at my end. Look, thank you very much, Graham. Look, just one question, I guess, at a very high level, and I guess keeping in mind what, I'm not sure if you listened earlier, but my comments about Hobart being a slightly unique city. But I mean, ultimately, from a Heart point of view, the ultimate aim, you would say, would be to get people spending less time in their cars?
Well, the Heart Foundation isn't anti-cars, and cars are a very important part of everyday modern life. But certainly, when it comes to commuting into the CBD, and when there are opportunities to be more physically active, then they should be encouraged. And if public policy can make that healthy choice the easier choice through the provision of good infrastructure, through making it safer for people to walk and to cycle, then there'll be an increased uptake in neighbourhoods in those shorter journeys where at the present there can be an over-reliance on vehicular traffic.
Yeah, okay. No, I mean, I guess I approach it from an angle, I guess, the flip side, which is that, I mean, I know we all saw it in the last few years of a congestion where, I mean, my neighbour, for instance, works at the airport and travels in from Dunedin and spending best part of 2 hours a day stuck in traffic, you know, which obviously isn't ideal for anyone. And I guess you're right. There's always that mix there, but I guess yeah, getting an understanding around you know, making sure that it does flow and it does work and it is appropriate for people, and I guess I like to hear your comments about looking at ways it can be safe, and there are other things that potentially we could do.
Well, I agree with what you just said, if that's a comment rather than a question.
Yeah, no, look, no, cool, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Coates, if you could lower your hand. If there's no further questions, no one else? Okay. Well, thanks very much, Graham, and feel free to send around to all the aldermen and councillors any information you have if you'd like to.
Yep, we'll certainly do that. Thank you, Chair.
And you're welcome to stay and listen to the debate now.
Thank you.
So item 6.2, I'll open the item for discussion.
Happy to move the item. Chair.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Items moved by the Lord Mayor. Is there any discussion on any of the recommendations? If and does anyone also have any questions for any of the officers? Oh, sorry. So Alderman Barakis, followed by Councillor Dutta, followed by the Lord Mayor. I'll go in that order. I didn't see which came up first, but I'll go with those three.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions to start off with, and I might have some comments after. Just for the director, just draw your attention to page 4.4 of the report, which does state that since 2009 there's been 1,011 crashes in the Central Business District, plus for the 490 in off-road locations, typically in car parks, etc., etc. Of those 1,011, the vast majority are minor, with only 11 incidences, 9 serious and 2 fatal, which by my mathematics is just a smidgen over 1%. Obviously, I'm sure nobody would disagree that one serious incident, well, more than one, one serious incident is one too many. But that's those sort of numbers don't strike me as something that's in need of urgent recourse to address. I'm just tossing up because it does sort of say that we're doing this in the interest of addressing a safety issue, but I'm just trying to figure out what the issue itself is.
Yeah, thank you, Alderman Barakis. Those statistics, as I understand it, is in part of the area. I understand, Louisa, you might have some wider statistics that do take in Campbell and Melville Street as well. But I would say that the initiative or this proposal has been on Council's book since 2011, and it's not solely while safety is an important element to it, and as you've heard from, I suppose, Graham Lynch, as well as others, that it also is an amenity aspect. Lowering the speed makes it a much more enjoyable place in which to do business, and it makes good business sense. By improving the amenity makes people want to stop more, want to spend more time in that environment. So there are two aspects, but Louisa, you've got some wider statistics that may be of some relevance.
Yeah, so as we included some of the extra streets, we have the data for the last 5 years. It's 4 fatalities and 55, including fatal, serious and injuries during that requiring first aid, which is about 3.6% of the total. That's 1 person injured per month across the period. And I just wanted to point out, there were some questions earlier regarding comparison with other cities, and I was involved in the lowering of the speed limits in Brisbane in 2009, and it resulted in a 30% reduction in the severity of crashes and deaths. And so it is something that, we are needing to get into step with other cities on.
So what was the total when you added when you going into that other area as well?
1,500 incidents, most of which are property. So the lower speeds, of course, are very good for the insurance industry, and the cars aren't getting damaged as well.
Right.
safety argument's quite compelling.
Right, and just a couple more. Like I'm also noting time. I suppose one of the other questions that I did ask earlier from one of the other representatives was I suppose why if 30 kilometres is safer than 40 kilometres an hour, why do we have 30 in some places and 40 in other places and 50 in other places? If based on the representatives and based on the information that we've been provided, 30 kilometres an hour is safer, then why do we still have 40 and 50 in other spots? For whoever's best able to answer the question.
Neil, is that all right if I answer?
Yeah, go ahead, Louise.
In response to the more highly pedestrianised areas of the city, more fine grain entrances to shops, more restaurants, that sort of thing. At this point, our level of data on the city, we need to up that, and there's quite a lot of work going on behind the scenes to do that. But that is our knowledge of the city and to respond to where those pedestrians are.
Thank you. And just sort of lastly, addressing it was one of the first comments made on the previous item actually was about us wanting to look towards doing sort of long-term plans on how the city is going to be functioning, especially around things like transport and accessibility, and the need to sort of plan these things ahead. We do have the precinct plan. We do have the previous item that had the sort of network plan. Just someone explain to me why this is sort of coming up as a separate thing when we do have all these other aspects that we're supposed to be all looking at them. They're all pieces of the same puzzle, and this thing just seems to be happening independently. Because I think, another I know that Councillor Dutta, Councillor Ewan, Councillor Sherlock all asked questions just before that were out of scope for the representatives. Noting that there were people in the previous item that I thought would have been very relevant to ask questions as far as the impact on the road network. So why haven't those conversations happened as yet, and why aren't we doing this in conjunction with all the other stuff we're doing as part of the precinct plan and the network plan and all the other stuff?
So I might throw that to Neil.
Yeah. Look,
what relationship is the network operating plan and what's proposed on the books here tonight?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, Alderman Barakis. Look, we've taken that matter up with State Growth. They are very comfortable to receive an application. The implication, what we're talking about here is changing 10% of the road network within the CBD from 50 to 30, and the balance of that network from 50 to 40. The overall implication of traffic movement through that zone, as we know, some of the stats that we've provided, I think, is an 18-second delay or a reduction in travel time over a kilometre. So we don't simply believe that it has a significant impact on the overall functioning of the network. And as I said, conversations with State Growth officials indicate that they're more than happy to consider an application, and we need to provide that evidence as part of a formal application. So
the sort of traffic impact evidence, is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, well, look, I think that would be something that the Transport Commissioner would want to see. So,
is there any reason why we don't have that in front of us now? Because that's something that I'd very much be interested in seeing.
Yeah, look, well, the purpose of the you would see the recommendation, and that work would need to be furnished along with any consultation outcomes that we do. But Louisa, do you have anything further to add in relation to that matter that you would like to raise?
Sorry, can we just repeat the original question, Alderman Barakis?
About the last question was more about the why do we not have the traffic impact of how this is going to affect traffic flow, how this is going to affect travel times in front of us now if that's something that we are going to have to provide to the commission when we do make these suggestions finally. And that will be my last question. Thank you, Chair. Once that's
the unique position of the City of Hobart Mobility is that the modelling capability sits outside of council, and that a large upgrade to the Cube model is occurring, which will incorporate all the forward population and employment forecasts and also the City Deal projects. That's due in July, and the network operating plan that was put forward earlier in the agenda, it will be able to utilise that data and potentially examine some of the scenarios that we have under or in early consideration for the Central Hobart Precinct Plan in terms of the kinds of options. So you've hit the nail on the head as to what we need. It's just a timing thing.
Thank you, Alderman Baraka. So that phase that you're talking about is part of the engagement phase with stakeholders and things, which would cover off on some of that data I think you're seeking. I think Councillor Dutta, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting that Alderman Barakas has already asked the questions that I had in mind. But let me just focus on two things then. The first one is the inconsistency, which I have also observed, 30, 40, and 50. And the question that I'm asking, I understand the explanation given, which I take that on board. But the other question from that, will this not make it difficult for the drivers? All of a sudden, there is a 30 or a 40, and then they get booked.
Look, there are those speed limits within the CBD already, and in the Cove. We've got 30 in Liverpool Street. We've in one section of Liverpool Street. We've got 40 in the Cove, and we've got 50 and throughout the rest of the CBD. So drivers come across changes in speed limits all the time, and they manage to navigate their way around controlling their cars accordingly. So I don't see. In fact, this is somewhat designed to provide some clarity around or consistency in treatment, where main shopping streets such as Liverpool and Collins Street will be, and Elizabeth Street will be 30, and outside of that zone will be 40, consistent with the majority of Sullivan's Cove, and so and the 30 in Franklin Wharf, for example. So there's some consistency in treatment here that we're trying to create here, as opposed to, a little piece of 30, a little piece of 40, and the like. So this is designed to provide some greater legibility, I suppose, in those limits.
Just a follow-up question, and then I have one more question after this. So for the sake of consistency, would it not be better to say either make it 30 everywhere or 40?
Well, look, well, it may well be, but consistency is not necessarily always the single point of determining these things. Otherwise, you'd have 30 or 40 across the city. Now that doesn't necessarily make sense. It's responding to the environment in which you are driving through. If it's a highly pedestrianised, as a fine grain opening commercial street, then it's desirable to have a reduced speed limit. That's what we've seen in Liverpool Street, for example. What we want to do is create that consistent approach across the CBD and in our retail precincts. I mean, we've got a retail precinct in Moona, for example, that has a 40 k speed limit. this is we see this in Melbourne, we see this in Sydney, we see it in Brisbane. These changes have occurred a long time ago, and we're simply, I think, catching up to those jurisdictions that have seen the benefit of and the safety benefit as well as the amenity benefit of a reduced speed limit within those highly in those denser commercial precincts.
Thank you for that full answer. A very valid points you have made. And the final question is, with regards to rationale, what is the rationale to open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and then from 7 to 10 p.m.?
Yeah, look, we understood that these precincts aren't heavily occupied outside of those hours. That's when the greater pedestrian activity and business activity occurs within those precincts. But we're keen to seek feedback on those times, and would be happy to readjust our thinking, our preliminary thinking around those times following that feedback.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Dudder. Next is the Lord Mayor, followed by Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions to start with. So can I just clarify, if we decide to agree to this, what is the expected time frame to prepare, to do the consultation, to prepare the full submission for the state government to consider it and for it to be adopted? What would you expect the time frame to be?
Oh, look, I think we're talking in the order of 3 months to pull together the necessary documentation and the like.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, and the consultation, and ultimately, if it was the wish of council, to report back to council clearly.
Sorry, and the government, their process, do you know how long that takes generally?
Look, I would imagine, no, I don't know the specifics, although they have in one recent deliberation in South Hobart that they were fairly quick to turn it around in a matter of weeks. So this will be much more complex, I suspect, and so would require a little further, a little longer deliberation, I would have thought.
Okay, and just to clarify again, that there's nobody who's involved in the network operation plan sees a problem with starting this work and doing that, because if I can, correct me if I'm wrong, that basically the number of streets this covers is fairly limited to the sort of the movement of large amounts of the traffic that would be more impacted, and that even the other thing is that when you actually look at the sort of evidence and the actual numbers, contrary to people's perceptions, the delays that are, or any sort of reduction in time or any increases in time of travel are in the order of seconds, over a kilometre, say. Did you say 1 kilometre, the difference between travelling at?
Yeah, from 50 to 40 is, I believe it's in the order of 18-second delay.
So an 18-second difference. Yeah. And so if it was I don't think we've got many, and so if it was 2 kilometres, a bit over 30 seconds difference in the journey time.
That's right, and that's assuming traffic is travelling at that speed limit, and as we know, it is constrained within the CBD. Speed limits are constrained as a result of vehicles moving through, people moving into parking spaces, moving out of parking spaces, people, and the like. So we don't believe it's a significant impediment to movement of traffic through, and the benefits, arguably the position the officers would put. And I think you've heard from others that the benefits far outweigh the issues raised.
Okay, and just very quickly, maybe Louisa or yourself, I mean, is there much in the way internationally of a link between reducing speed limits and congestion? Because that seems to be what people immediately jump to, but is there any evidence to show that reducing speed limits increases congestion?
Look, I'd be happy to hand that one over to Louisa if you...
So a few things, as Neil mentioned, the manoeuvring, less crashes because you're at lower speeds. Also the shortness in the length of the blocks here in Hobart is such that, you know, you're not getting any advantage getting numbers of cars through, any disadvantage, particularly in a lower speed environment, particularly the AM peak, which is where people would be most concerned. There would be, we think, no difference.
Look, and I just on that crash statistics, it was interesting that Melbourne, when they reduced their their speed limits from 50 to 40 back in 2011, I believe, they had a 37% reduction in crashes, which in themselves, you know, do cause delays, as we know, and significant gridlock within the overall network. So if you had less crashes, one would argue you'd have less congestion due to the gridlock.
All right, thank you, Lord Mayor. We'll move on to Councillor Sherlock, followed by Councillor Coates. And if the Lord Mayor could lower a hand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I just wondered, it was a question I asked before, so perhaps Neil or maybe Louisa can answer it. I was just wondering, especially maybe Louisa from her work done in Brisbane, as she mentioned, was there any data or perhaps work either done in Brisbane or here in Hobart that showed that reducing speed limits would reduce customers going into the city, or business would be significantly reduced as a result of reducing speed limits in the city?
So in relation to the Brisbane example, while I lived through it, no, it's a short answer, but I think that's a lived experience, that it actually seemed to increase particularly the economic footfall in the city. We put in lower speed limits and also mid-block links, some better pedestrian crossings on mid-blocks because it has very long blocks there. So overall, there was a much greater vitality in the city from an economic perspective. What I was going to do after this was reach out to the other jurisdictions, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, and get some of their results from that.
Oh, I would really appreciate if you do get it in time. I would really appreciate if you could pass that on to us, and probably all the other councillors and aldermen would want it too. That would be really appreciated. Thanks, Louisa.
Look, and I'll just add, if I may, the Heart Foundation has got a publication, Good for Business, the benefit of making streets more walking and cycling friendly. And there are some interesting case studies, Australian and international case studies, in relation to that very question, that it is good for business when you make it a much more pleasant environment in which to walk and to sit beside such a street. So that will, I understand that Mr. Lynch will circulate that publication.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much, Neil. Thanks, Louisa. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Councillor Sherlock. Councillor Coates.
Look, thank you very much. Look, one question I have, I was still down, I remember when they took Macquarie and Davey Streets from 60 to 50. I mean, I guess that anecdotally, you know, I would argue a contributory factor. We've had horrific sort of gridlock in the last few years since that's happened. Do you know, reducing those speeds, is there any sort of data that the city has? I guess there's a question to the director for you, Chair, but dropping it from 60 to 50 on the main roads there did actually have these beneficial outcomes. And I guess secondly to that, you know, I know we're arguing here where to draw the line, but I guess keeping in mind that a lot of Hobart's roads are actually, you know, people trying to get not in and out of Hobart itself, but rather to get to various areas around the greater Hobart area.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, and I want to make the point that we're not proposing to change Macquarie and Davey or the Brooker Avenue or Tasman Highway. I mean, I think that those arterial routes are, for the very reason that you pointed out, that they are routes through the city and frequented by heavy freight and the like. But to your question, has there been studies done to understand the amenity effect? I don't think that there has been, but I don't know, Louisa, did you want to comment in relation to that?
I think the way that I think I should respond to that is to say that, you know, Hobart's at a moment in its history where it's a town becoming a city. And what we're seeing under the city deal is that we need a mode shift to public transport. And that's where the investments will be made to consider congestion and to find the benefits. So the 30 seconds is not going to be something that assists overall. The growth is happening in the regional shires around Hobart. And in essence, on the AM peak in our network, it sits in what you call saturated conditions. So it's in essence already saturated, but there will be delays. We've had a look at that on the Tasman Bridge and on the outlet outside of Hobart, you see, because those volumes are coming into Hobart. So the best answer there is to build the public transport network links.
Look, and if I just may add the point that Louisa touched on there, that Hobart is changing from a large town into, you know, a smaller city or a city. And to reflect that, there's going to be 850 new hotel rooms open up in the CBD this year, this calendar year. That is a significant jump in the number of people moving through the city, and coupled with 450 new student accommodation rooms in Melville Street. So that will change the amount of people moving through the city on foot and throughout the day and evening. So it will become a much more heavily pedestrianised experience for a lot of those visitors. So it's an exciting time for the city, and one that you know, the timing of this is pretty appropriate in my mind, given that significant transformation that's going to happen once the borders open up.
Thanks, Neil. So unless there's any further questions, I'm happy to open the debate now. If anybody has got any comments to make, we have a
Councillor Harvey, you just cut out for a second again there.
Okay. So we have a motion for approval from the Lord Mayor. If anybody has any comments to make, then make them now, and we'll have the debate, and then we'll put the item. Councillor Dutta.
Thank you very much. I have really enjoyed the questions and the contributions made by everybody, and the deputation and their particular contribution to this discussion. It appears to me that this is not driven by a particular group of people or some ideology. It appears to me, from what I've heard this afternoon, that there are 4 points for me which is vital to vote for this. One, it's for safety reason. Secondly, for amenity purposes. Thirdly, for health and well-being. And fourth, that it is a recommendation from staff who have done their work. So I will support that. Thank you very much.
Any other contributions? Please put your hand up. Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to everyone who's provided information for this. I'm still not, my views on this I think have been pretty well ventilated as far as whether or not I think this is a good idea or not. But I think and especially the fact that councillors Dutta and Sherlock and Ewan, having asked questions that I think were very pertinent questions that didn't have anybody to, any of the representatives were able to respond to. I was quite curious that there weren't any relevant stakeholders that were here to give deputations, considering that there was relevant stakeholders present on the previous item. So I would have thought that having somebody from State Growth, from the Roads Department of State Growth, would have been a more relevant person to have present giving a deputation, and the Heart Foundation is as good as their contribution to this debate was. But look, I am concerned that we've got these broad plans that we are doing, and even it was mentioned that we do have traffic modelling that is going to be coming back to us in the course of a couple of months. That we're suggesting that we push through with endorsing a plan to take to consultation without having already got that stuff ready. I'm not comfortable that that's a responsible way to go forward. I don't think that it's really in line with the way we've really been doing things recently, especially. Even for those that are more in agreement with the concept of this than what I am, I would have thought that especially if this is something that we've been doing over the course of quite a while, as the director suggested, if that's the case, why the rush when we do have all this information that is coming? Because ultimately, if 30 kilometres an hour is safer for pedestrians than 40 kilometres an hour, then by the same argument, 20 kilometres an hour is safer than 30, and 10 safer than 20, and 0 safer altogether. We may as well just close the roads down. Obviously, that's taking the argument to the absurd conclusion. I'll admit that. But so obviously there's a balance that needs to be made there, and we've got the necessary and the real side of the coin that is road safety, and I don't think anyone's trying to minimise that. But on the other side of that, we do have to balance that against the practicality of getting around the city. And if we don't have the modelling, how can we make the assertion that 30 kilometres in this road is a good balance if we don't have the statistics to suggest that, especially when those statistics are currently on their way anyway? I think, if we talk about incrementally reducing speed limits, I think in a few years' time, somebody made the comment on radio that we may as well have somebody waving red flags in front of the cars as they drive through the city like they did in the old days. It's if we don't do this right, it's approaching the point of absurdity. We do have, I think it's already been sort of shown publicly to be widely unpopular, and that's the reason why the suggestions are made for incremental change, so as not to particularly offend the population too much. So look, I would hope, and I might even test the committee rather than completely being against this altogether, in the interest of finding some sort of reasonable compromise here, to move an amendment that this either move an amendment or move a foreshadowed motion, whichever is more appropriate, that this consultation take place after the traffic modelling that was suggested will be here in a few months is ready, so that the engagement can be done with both sides of the picture. So I'm happy to, whichever the committee thinks is more appropriate, but I'm happy to move that as either an amendment or a foreshadowed motion, if that's more appropriate.
Well, I think I'd be happy to take that as an amendment.
Yep.
But if I could just make a comment.
Sure.
You're putting the horse before the cart. As part of the process, post this recommendation, if it gets through, that's when the extra information will be created, because we need to create a report to give to the Transport Commissioner. There's no point doing all the work and then having it, defeated around the table at some point. The process is what it is, and I think that the director has outlined the process, and we don't have a conflict with the NOM project, as well as the director has clearly explained. So anyway, you're welcome to move that as an amendment. I'll take that.
I will move that as an amendment. I suppose my answer to that is how do we, granted that information is going to have to come eventually, and that's part of the process, but how can we properly engage with stakeholders without telling them the full? We've got the modelling for the safety aspect of it, but we haven't got the modelling for the traffic impact study, and we're going to engage with stakeholders. So we're only giving them one side of the equation on that, in that regard.
Look, if I may assist through you, Chair. Look, we're keen to get that modelling done, and it's not far away. So, I mean, as officers, we'd commit to doing that, getting that modelling in place, so it can be part of the package that goes out to stakeholders, so they're fully aware of the modelling of the implications of what we're proposing. So, we'd be happy to include that as part of any recommendation.
And what did you say the timeline was for that, roughly?
Look, it's in the order of 3 to 4 weeks. So we would be more than happy to hold off on consultation to include that sort of modelling in any engagement that we undertook.
Well, given that, then thank you for that, Director. I'll test the floor, Chair, and actually move that we defer this item until that information comes forward. Given that we're only talking on the course of a few weeks, I think it's best that we have both sides of that picture for our own benefit as well as for the people that we're seeking to, the stakeholders that we're seeking to engage with. So I'll move that we defer until that information comes back to council, and I'll move that.
Okay. All right. So you've had two motions. You've had an amendment,
Oh,
and
no,
now you've got a motion for deferral. Which one do you want to go with?
The motion for deferral, Chair.
Okay. So we've got to put that now. That's procedural. We have a motion for deferral from Alderman Barakis. What I'll do is go around to each person and see whether they support a motion for deferral. If you could say yes or no. So, Lord Mayor?
No.
Councillor Ewan?
No.
Councillor Barakis, Alderman Barakis?
Yes.
Councillor Dutta?
No.
And the chair says no. So that's lost 4-1. Is there any more discussion on the substantive motion? And
Yes.
Alderman Reynolds?
Yeah.
Sorry, Lord Mayor.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've really appreciated the discussion, the advice from our staff, and the advice from the other experts that have provided evidence. You know, I do think it is well overdue for us to take this step. In fact, what's probably most absurd is that we have taken so long to do this. This is becoming, you know, a nationally consistent approach. Certainly, our capital city sisters and brothers did this many years ago in terms of the speed reductions, and they've seen the benefits, and we're just waiting. We're waiting to see those benefits as well. I mean, who knows? Perhaps some of those injuries and fatalities that have occurred in the last few years might not have if we had moved more quickly. You know, I heard that there's been a 30% increase in Brisbane in the road trauma since they introduced their reduction. Melbourne's had the 37% reduction in crashes, which has actually assisted with reducing congestion. So there's so many co-benefits of doing this. And on the flip side, there's just some vague sort of suggestions that don't seem to be based with much evidence at all, that there is that this would actually lead to congestion, when again, the evidence, not only from what we have, and this is what the modelling will expand upon, but we already have the basic concepts, which is that there's barely any impact, and a journey of 1 kilometre will only be only 18 seconds will be added to it if you drop the speed limit by 10 kilometres. So 18 seconds is not significant. And there's some evidence that you'll actually gain benefits with congestion, because more people, particularly in our city area, our LGA, will be more inclined to walk and cycle because they'll feel safer. So they're people that won't necessarily, one person who feels it's safe to cycle will be one less person driving, which makes more road space available. So, you know, there's actually so many reasons why this is a positive thing. And I understand that it's very easy to get clickbait by saying, you know, oh, let's just, reducing speed limits, slow BART, blah, blah, blah. But, if you actually educate people and provide them with the evidence and have a solutions-based approach to tackling city issues rather than a sort of clickbait, let's create anxiety and...
Point of order, Chair. Point of order, Chair. This is just accusing people of making suggestions on the other side of this argument for chasing clickbait. That's not appropriate.
I think it's my
Wait,
opinion.
hold it. It was the Lord Mayor's opinion, and there was no person identified. So I don't think it's a point of order. Continue, Lord Mayor.
Yeah, and it is, the several media outlets. It is easy to get people to engage on that space, but I think it is a better approach to actually provide people with all of the evidence, including how this is happening all over the country. So I'm very supportive of this, and I hope that we as a council do get behind this. That we do look at the evidence and we start this process, and we ultimately will have to leave it to the state government to make a decision, but they'll hopefully also look at all of the evidence. But let's catch up and with our capital city colleagues. We do want to become a great small city, and this is part of the journey to make our inner city a very vibrant place. There's going to be lots of people walking around, lots of people shopping, and we want the inner city streets and also our neighbourhood shopping streets to be safe and lively and pleasant places to be for people, whether they're in cars, on bikes, walking, outdoor dining. It's about streets being good for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, Lord Mayor, thank you. Next, we have Councillor Sherlock, and then Councillor Coates.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I came today to have a listen, particularly about this issue, and of course the one that we talked about before, and how this all interacts together. Because I myself was not fully aware of all the evidence and all the facts. And to me, the biggest things for me was to do with that reducing the speeds would cause a congestion and slow traffic. And clearly we've had a lot of evidence that is contrary to that assertion. There was also assertions to do with reducing the speed would reduce the customers coming into the city itself, which again, we can get more evidence on that, but we've already been told today that that doesn't actually happen either. And as the director has pointed out, the various different case studies from the Hout Foundation report. So I came here today trying to actually understand from an open point of view as to whether reducing the speed limit was in fact a solution in search of a problem, because I did want to know that. I did want to see if that was in fact true, and I'm really yes, I've been really enlightened today. I do appreciate that, so thank you very much to everyone. But I was interested in Alderman Barakas's move to actually defer it. I wondered if perhaps the director or Louisa would be able to tell me both sides of that, the advantages and disadvantages to defer in these 3 to 4 weeks to include it in the information package.
Yeah, look, what I'm saying is that we will include it within the information package for stakeholders. So we believe that there's not an issue. We understand that the concerns that have been expressed, and we will be providing that evidence as part of the consultation package. I mean, we just need, is council interested in exploring this? If so, yeah, we'll go away, we'll pull all that evidence together, consult widely, and then ultimately come back for council to say yay or nay. That's what we're seeking here.
Yes, thank you very much, Director. So it's not imperative or crucial to defer?
No, well, it certainly gives us an indication that you'd like us to at least explore this and get the consultation and evidence underway. So, we need a decision, a resolution to proceed, and that's what we're seeking.
Yes, excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Councillor Sherlock. Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I guess I take your comment at the end there, where you're looking for direction as to exploring this, and I think I guess give my sort of 2 cents in the view. But look, I mean, the ultimate aim of getting people to spend less time in their cars is a good thing. You know, that's what the representations towards us said. I guess my fear is that. And I think we did see it with the reduction on Davey and Macquarie streets, although it would be fascinating if there was any definitive study on that. But, you know, we are unique. I mean, it was said before that the fastest growing municipalities are the outer Hobart ones. I mean, you look at Brighton, you look at Sorell, these are beyond the public transport network, which is already at a situation where it's full, it's subsidised, and you know, 30% of the buses sit there empty during a day because they're not needed outside of the sort of school run windows. So, you know, we are, I don't think, quite comparable to the Melbournes and Sydneys and Adelaides and Brisbane of the world in terms of size and scale yet, although I agree we are moving towards a city. But to me, I mean, my fear is that this is going to be a solution looking for a problem. I just don't wonder if we can't do things a little bit differently in Hobart. And I mean, you know, I'd start by questioning why people are building and we're just having more and more sprawl, and then somehow expecting that the congestion is going to get better, not worse. And if you do go and investigate this, I guess I would just urge you to keep an open mind to, if you like, out of the box possible solutions, because, you know, as I see it, one of the issues is that Hobart is essentially a geographically a thoroughfare city. So if you've got people that need to get to the airport, they've got to go through the CBD. If you've got people that need to get to the port, if you've got people that need to get to the hospital or to, you know, and I agree, it's a dual purpose, if you like, CBD. And so look, it would be interesting, but I did a little bit of sounding out, and definitely a lot of people have real fears about reducing speed limits. And I don't think they're necessarily unfounded, albeit I guess the more information, the better to make a good choice. But I guess I'd just like to sort of make sure those points, if you like, are on the radar. But thank you.
Yep. Unmute, Bill.
Yep.
Yep.
Thanks, Councillor Coates. And on to you, Councillor Ewan.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be really quick because I think Councillor Reynolds and Councillor Dutta and Councillor Sherlock have basically said and asked everything that I would have liked to. So yeah, thank you very much for providing us with this information. And I just think it would be really silly of us to discount this as, you know, just a silly thing to do, because it is evidence-based best practice. We're not just pulling this out of thin air, it's being done elsewhere and to great benefit of basically all sectors. And I fail to see a downside to this. And as Councillor Reynolds touched on before, you know, and on the other side of this, it is basically just a straw man argument based on fear and sort of feelings and misinformation. And if we do put the effort out there to educate people and through the consultation process, I think we can come up with a really good outcome for our whole community. So yeah, really happy to support this work. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've heard from everybody. I'll also be supporting the recommendation, and I also believe in science and data and research, and I place that well ahead of personal opinions on topics. And while personal opinions are important at times, I think when we're making big decisions that involve the city, or making decisions that involve the city, we need to stay focused on the facts. We need to stay focused on the realities of what is being proposed, and we need to make sure that the public is always aware of the real facts, and that we go forward using the data and the evidence, and that helps to create the report, or produce the report that will be going to the Transport Commissioner. And then the final say over this, if it gets through council, will be with the Transport Commissioner. And that will be a very thorough process, because if it's not, they will send it back to us. So I'm confident that the officers, if given the go-ahead, will be able to produce a report that represents the council thoroughly to go to the Transport Commissioner. So on that note, I'll now put the item as moved by the Lord Mayor. I'll just go around the screens and see what people say, either yes or no. So Lord Mayor.
Yes.
Councillor Ewan.
Yep.
Councillor Alderman Barakis.
No.
Councillor Dutta.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So that's carried 4-1. So I'd just like to thank the staff also for staying around to listen to the debate. And that'll go to full council at the next council meeting. Thank you all to the staff. So item 6.3 is the motion on the solar panels. This came about as a result of a notice of motion. So the recommendation there, I'll just scroll through to the recommendation. I'm sure everybody's had a chance to read it. Okay, so is there any questions about the report or the recommendations? Would somebody like to move it?
Yep.
I think Councillor Dutta got in first, sorry. So moved by Councillor Dutta. Is there any debate about the recommendation? There being none, I'll put Councillor Dutta's motion that we accept the recommendations. And I'll go around the screens. Lord Mayor?
Yes.
Councillor Ewan?
Yes.
Alderman Barakis?
No.
Sorry?
No.
No. Councillor Dutta?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So that's carried 4 votes to 1. Okay. So item 6.4 is Council Delegations, Local Government Highways Act, proposed amendments to officer delegation. I think this is fairly straightforward, but Mr. Doyle, would you like to make a comment?
Very quickly, Chairman, just to advise committee that there are no new delegations being requested here. It's the inclusion of a newly appointed officer after an internal restructure that we need to assign some delegations to, and the assignment of delegations must be a council decision.
Would somebody like to move the recommendation?
Happy to move that, Chair.
That's moved by Alderman Barakis. Is there any comments or debate? There being none, I'll put the item as moved by Councillor Barakis, and I'll just go around the screens. Lord Mayor, how do you vote?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Councillor Ewan?
Yes.
Alderman Barakis?
Yep.
Councillor Dutta?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So that's unanimous. Item 6.5 is the Hobart Municipal Emergency Management Plan. And I understand that we have some extra information here which may lead to a deferral, and I'll defer again to Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Chair. We were advised as late as last week that there's been a new officer appointed by the state agency, and their role is to review emergency management plans. And of course, they've decided that ours was the first that they would review. So if I can ask committee to defer consideration of this matter this evening, because we will have an updated plan to resubmit following our negotiations with the state government and reviewing the work that they have undertaken.
Okay, could I have a motion, please, to defer the item? That's moved by Councillor Dutta. No debate on deferral, so I'll go around the screens. Lord Mayor, how do you vote?
Yes.
Councillor Ewan?
Yes.
Alderman Barakis?
Yep.
Councillor Dutta?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, so that's deferrals carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Okay, on to 6.6, which is the City Infrastructure Committee review of the meeting time. I would prefer to have a later starting time. I think 4 o'clock might be too early for some. Can I have some discussion from the members of the committee? I also have a note from the Deputy Lord Mayor, who's an apology tonight, but she's able to also give her authority to change the time via an email to the staff. So she's recommended that we change it to either 5 o'clock or 5:15. What do the other committee members think? Lord Mayor, what time would you like this meeting to start? 5 o'clock? Councillor Ewan?
Yeah, the later the better for me. I'd be happy with 5:15, either or. And I just think in terms of accessibility for the community as well, like if people want to give deputations and things and they have 9 to 5 jobs, how are they supposed to make it to a 4 o'clock meeting? So yeah, like I just think the later the better.
So would you prefer 5 or 5:15?
I prefer 5:15, but I'm not going to die in a ditch over it.
Lord Mayor, are you happy with 5:15?
Yeah, happy.
I'm also okay with 5:15, and the Lord Mayor is happy with 5:15. So we all agree, and I'll just ask Belinda. So the time will be changed to 5:15. Thank you. Could somebody move that, please, that we change the time from 4 o'clock to 5:15? Thank you, Councillor Ewan. All those in favour say, well, I'll go around the room. Lord Mayor?
Yes.
Councillor Ewan?
Yes.
And I say yes as well, and the deputy has said yes, so that's unanimous. Okay. All right. Alderman Barakis.
Yep.
And Councillor Dutta.
Yep.
Okay, so that's unanimous. We'll change the time. Okay. 6.7, the minutes of the Active Travel Committee, the Hobart Active Travel Committee. Would somebody like to move that we receive the minutes? Okay, I've had Councillor Ewan got in first. Is there any discussion on the minutes of the Active Transport Committee? Is there any? Okay, I'll go around the room just to make sure. Okay, so it's moved by Councillor Ewan that we received the minutes. So, Lord Mayor, how do you vote?
Yes.
Councillor Ewan?
Yes.
Alderman Barakis?
Yep.
Councillor Dutta?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So they're carried. That's carried unanimously. We now have the committee action status report. Are there any questions with regard to the status report? If none, would somebody like to move that we receive that? Okay, Councillor Dutta, your hand's up first, and I'll go around the room. Well, is there any? Okay, I will go around the room. Lord Mayor, how do you vote?
Yes.
Councillor Ewan?
Yes.
Alderman Barakis?
Yes.
Councillor Dutta?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So that's carried unanimously. Responses to questions without notice. We have 3 responses. These are not open to debate. They're just for noting. Do we need a motion? We do need a motion to note those responses. Who'd like to move that? Councillor Ewan, you've got in first. Okay, and we'll go around the room again that we note the response.
Yes.
Councillor Ewan?
Yes.
Alderman Barakis?
Yes.
Councillor Dutta?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. That's carried unanimously. Questions without notice. Does anybody have a question without notice they would like to ask? Councillor Dutta, your hand is up. Yep.
Through you, Chair. My question is that on this committee, I understand there are 4 elected members.
Correct.
If there are 4 elected members, why did we have to have 2 of us co-opted?
Because the Deputy Lord Mayor is away and we can have 5 members on the committee. So we're 1 member short for this committee.
Right. Okay. So then just a follow-up question to get some clarity on this. So if people want to resign from committees, can they just resign at any time they want to?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Oh. Okay.
Sorry. I do have 3 questions, and I can send the actual wording in if they need to be taken on notice, but they might not be. The first one is, can anything be done by council to limit the use of air brakes by large trucks in Macquarie and Davey Street?
So,
yeah, sorry. Look, I'll take that one on notice.
Okay.
Okay. Next question.
Can this committee get prior notice of the various state and federal road and transport programs, and this is funding programs, and what projects the city is planning to submit? And can criteria be developed for what projects are prioritised for these programs?
Chairman, I'll take that one on notice so as we can provide a more fulsome response.
Okay, thank you. And the final one is just, can anything be done about the amount of sand that is dropped in Lower Macquarie Street in the South Hobart Shopping Centre? I think that's the basic question. There's just, I know we have a cleaning regime with the company involved, but it just doesn't seem to ever be enough. And I just wonder whether there's any way there's other regulatory tools rather than the cleaning, just in terms of covering of loads or something, because it's just it seems constantly full of sand.
Chairman, I'll certainly take that on notice. The Lord Mayor is correct. We do have more intensive cleaning regimes in that area, and there is a financial contribution to those costs by the operator in question. But I think it's better if I take it on notice, because I think there's some other factors that come into that question as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lord Mayor. And Councillor Coates' hand is up. Do you have a question?
Yes, and look, apologies if this is not right form. I think it is, but I actually have a question on behalf of a constituent I know, but relates to the Hill Street grocery in West Hobart, and I guess when that development went ahead, the traffic management plan and what, if any, options were canvassed. But and if you need me to send this in writing, I'm more than happy to. But essentially, when you leave the car park, you have to turn left because it's a one-way turn street. And then if you want to get back on the city side of West Hobart, you have to turn left down Butterworth Street, which is a very narrow street at one end. I guess their question was in regards to if that was assessed as to whether it was possible to make it a one-way street as part of that development. And I think the backstory is that they're finding that there's a lot of traffic, and so it's hard to use that road considering it's quite narrow. Apologies for the sound in the background there. But if it's easier for me to email through, I'm more than happy to do so.
Look, yes, I think I'll take it on notice, but yeah, if you could email the specifics. But this location has been reviewed numerous times, and we'll have an answer for you back in writing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Coates. No other questions? Okay, we'll now close the open and we'll move into the close. Could I have a motion to move into the close, please? Okay, is that you? I know. Councillor Dutta. Okay, so I'll put that to the vote that we move into the closed. Lord Mayor, how do you vote?
Yes.
Councillor Ewan?
Yes.
Alderman Barakis?
Yes.
Councillor Dutta?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So we'll now move into the close.